So, I was midway through the last chapter, Kehaar, when I was interrupted and I got distracted for the rest of the night. So, we are coming back to the conversation where Hazel was talking to everyone about how they had a problem with the Warren. And Hazel had just pointed out that they had no does. Rabbits live close to death, and when death comes closer than usual, thinking about survival leaves little room for anything else. But now, in the evening sunshine on the friendly, empty down, with a good burrow at his back and the grass turning to pellets in his belly, Hazel knew that he was lonely for a doe. The others were silent, and he could tell that his words had sunk in. The rabbits grazed or lay basking in the sun. A lark went twittering up into the brighter sunshine above, soared and sang and came slowly down, ending with a sideways, spread-wing glide and a wagtail's run through the grass. The sun dipped lower. At last Blackberry said, "What's to be done? Set out again?" "I hope not," said Hazel. "It all depends. What I'd like to do is get hold of some does and bring them here." "Where from?" "Another warren." "But are there any on these hills? How do we find out? The wind never brings the least smell of rabbits." "I'll tell you how," said Hazel. The bird will go and search for us." "Hazel-ra!" cried Blackberry. "What a marvelous idea! That bird could find out in a day what we couldn't discover for ourselves in 1,000. But are you certain it can be persuaded to do it? Surely as soon as it gets better, it'll simply fly away and leave us." "I can't tell," answered Hazel. "All we can do is feed it and hope for the best. But Bigwig, since you seem to be getting on with it so well, perhaps you can explain to it how much this means to us. It has only to fly over the downs and let us know what it sees." "You leave him to me," said Bigwig. "I think I know how to do it." Hazel's anxiety and the reason for it were soon known to all the rabbits, and there was not one who did not realize what they were up against. There was nothing very startling in what he had said. He was simply the one, as a chief rabbit ought to be, through whom a strong feeling, latent throughout the warren, had come to the surface. But his plan to make use of the gull excited everyone, and it was seen as something that not even Blackberry could have hit upon. Reconnaissance is familiar to all rabbits. Indeed, it is second nature. But the idea of making use of a bird, and one so strange and savage, convinced them that Hazel-ra, if he could really do it, must be as clever as Alarara himself. For the next few days, a lot of hard work went into feeding Kehaar. Acorn and Pipkin, boasting that they were the best insect catchers in the warren, brought in great numbers of beetles and grasshoppers. At first, the gull's principal hardship was lack of water. He suffered a good deal and was reduced to tearing at the stems of the long grasses for moisture. However, during his third night in the warren, it rained for 3 or 4 hours and puddles formed on the track. A cluttery spell set in, as it often does in Hampshire when haytime approaches. High winds from the south laid the grass flat all day, turning it to a dull, damascene silver. The great branches of the beeches moved little, but spoke loudly. There were squalls of rain on the wind. The weather made Kehaar restless. He walked about a good deal, watching the flying clouds, and snapped up everything the foragers brought. Searching became harder, for in the wet the insects burrowed into the deep grass and had to be scratched out. One afternoon Hazel, who now shared a burrow with Fiver as in the old days, was woken by Bigwig to be told that Kehaar had something to say to him. He made his way to Kehaar's lobby without coming above ground. The first thing he noticed was that the gull's head was molting and turning white, though a dark brown patch remained behind each eye. Hazel greeted him and was surprised to be answered in a few words of halting, broken Lapine. Evidently Kehaar had prepared a short speech. "Mr. Hazel, these rabbits work hard," said Kehaar. "I no finish now. Soon I go fine." "That's good news," said Hazel. "I'm glad." Kehaar relapsed into the hedgerow vernacular. "Mr. Bigwig, he plenty good fella." "Yes, he is." "He say you not getting mothers. He's finish mothers. Plenty trouble for you." "Yes, that's true. We don't know what to do. No mothers anywhere." "Listen. I get big, fine plan. I go wide now. Wing, he better. Wind finish, then I fly. Fly for you. No find plenty mothers. Tell you where they are, yeah?" "Why, what a splendid idea, Kehaar. How clever of you to think of it. You're a very fine bird." He's finished mothers for me this year. It's too late. All mothers sitting on nest now. Eggs come. I'm sorry. Another time I get mother. Now I fly for you. We'll do everything we possibly can to help you. The next day the wind dropped and Kehaar made 1 or 2 short flights. However, it was not until 3 days later that he felt able to set out on his search. It was a perfect June morning. He was snapping up numbers of the little white-shelled downland snails from the wet grass and cracking them in his great beak when he suddenly turned to Bigwig and said, "Now I fly for you." He opened his wings. The 2-foot span arched above Bigwig, who sat perfectly still while the white feathers beat the air round his head in a kind of ceremonious farewell. Laying his ears flat in the fan draught, he stared up at Kehaar as the gull rose rather heavily into the air. When he flew, his body, so long and graceful on the ground, took on the appearance of a thick, stumpy cylinder, from the front of which his red beak projected between his round black eyes. For a few moments he hovered, his body rising and falling between his wings. Then he began to climb, sailed sideways over the grass, and disappeared northward below the edge of the escarpment. Bigwig returned to the hangar with the news that Kehaar had set out. The gull was away several days, longer than the rabbits had expected. Hazel could not help wondering whether he really would return, for he knew that Kehaar, like themselves, felt the mating urge, and he thought it quite likely that he would be off to the big water and the raucous, teeming gull colonies of which he had spoken with such feeling to Bigwig. As far as he was able, he kept his anxiety to himself, but one day when they were alone, he asked Fiver whether he thought Kehaar would return. "He will return," said Fiver unhesitatingly. "And what will he bring with him?" "How can I tell?" replied Fiver. But later, when they were underground, silent and drowsy, he said suddenly, "The gifts of El Herrera, trickery, great danger, and blessing for the warren." When Hazel questioned him again, he seemed to be unaware that he had spoken and could add nothing more. Bigwig spent most of the hours of daylight watching for Kehaar's return. He was inclined to be surly and short, and once, when Bluebell remarked that he thought Mr. Pigwig's fur cap was molting in sympathy for absent friends, he showed a flash of his old sergeant major spirit and cuffed and abused him twice round the honeycomb, until Holly intervened to save his faithful jester from further trouble. It was late one afternoon, when a light north wind blowing and the smell of hay drifting up from the fields of Sidmonton, when Bigwig came hurtling down into the honeycomb to announce that Kehaar was back. Hazel suppressed his excitement and told everyone to keep out of the way while he went to see him alone. On second thoughts, however, he took Fiver and Bigwig with him. The 3 of them found Kehaar back in his lobby. It was full of droppings, messy and malodorous. Rabbits will not excrete underground, and Kehaar's habit of fouling his own nest had always disgusted Hazel. Now, in his eagerness to hear his news, the guano smell seemed almost welcome. "Glad to see you back, Kehaar," he said. "Are you tired?"
"Bing, he still go tired. Fly little bit, stop little bit, everything go fine."
"Are you hungry? Shall we get you some insects?"
"Fine, fine. Good fellas. Plenty beetle."
All insects were beetle to Kehaar. Clearly he had missed their attentions and was ready to enjoy being back. Although he no longer needed to have food brought to the lobby, he evidently felt that he deserved it. Bigwig went to get his foragers, and Kehaar kept them busy until sunset. At last he looked shrewdly at Fiver and said,
"Hey, Mr. Little One, you know what I bring ya?"
"I've no idea," replied Fiver rather shortly.
"Then I tell. All this big hill, I go along him this way, that way, where sun come up, where sun go down, is no rabbits, is nothings."
He stopped. Hazel looked at Fiver apprehensively.
"Then I go down in bottom, is farm, with big trees all round, on little hill, you know?"
"No, we don't know, but go on."
"I show you, he not far, you see him. And there is rabbits. Is rabbits live in box, live with men, you know?"
"Live with men? Did you say live with men?"
Ja, live with men. In shed, rabbits live in box, in shed. Men bring food, you know?"
"I know this happens," said Hazel. "I've heard of it. That's fine, Kehaar. You've been very thorough. But it can't help us, can it?"
"I think is mothers in pig box. But else is no rabbits. Not in fields, not in woods, no rabbits. Anyways, I no see 'em." That sounds bad. Wait, I tell more, now you hear. I go flying other way, where sun go middle of day. You know, this way is big water.
Did you go to the big water then? Asked Bigwig.
Nah, not near so far. But out this way is river, you know?
No, we haven't been so far.
Is a river, repeated Kehaar. And here is town of rabbits.
On the other side of the river?
Nah. You go that way is pig fields all the way. Then, after long way, is come down to town of rabbits. Very big. And after that is iron road and then river.
Iron Road? Asked Fiver.
Yeah, iron road. You not see him. Iron road? Men make him.
Kehaar's speech was so outlandish and distorted at the best of times that it was only too common for the rabbits to be unsure what he meant. The vernacular words which he used now for iron and road, familiar enough to seagulls, his listeners had scarcely ever heard. Kehaar was quick to impatience, and now, as often, they felt at a disadvantage in the face of his familiarity with a wider world than their own. Hazel thought quickly. Two things were clear. Kehaar had evidently found a big warren some way off to the south, and whatever the iron road was, the warren was on this side of both it and of a river. If he understood rightly, it seemed to follow that the iron road and the river could be ignored for their purposes. Kehaar, he said, I want to be certain. Can we get to the rabbit's town without bothering about the iron road and the river?
Yeah, not go to iron road. Rabbit town in bushes for pig lonely fields. Plenty mothers.
How long would it take to go from here to the town?
I think 2 days. It's long way.
Good for you, Kehaar. You've done everything we hoped. You rest now. We'll feed you as long as you want.
Sleep now. Tomorrow plenty beetle, yeah.
The rabbits made their way back to the honeycomb. Hazel told Kehaar's news, and a long, disorderly, intermittent discussion began. This was their way of reaching a conclusion. The fact that there was a warren 2 or 3 days' journey to the south flickered and oscillated down among them as a penny wavers down through deep water, moving one way and the other, shifting, vanishing, reappearing, but always sinking toward the firm bottom. Hazel let the talk run on as long as it would, until at last they dispersed and slept. The next morning they went about their lives as usual, feeding Kehaar and themselves, playing and digging. But all this time, just as a drop of water slowly swells until it's heavy enough to fall from a twig, the idea of what they meant to do was becoming clear and unanimous. By the following day Hazel saw it plain. It so happened that the time for speaking came when he was sitting on the bank at sunrise, with Fiver and 3 or 4 others. There was no need to summon a general gathering. The thing was settled. When it reached them, those who were not there would accept what he had said without having heard him at all. This warren that Kehaar found, said Hazel, he said it was big. So we can't take it by force, said Bigwig. I don't think I want to go and join it, said Hazel. Do you? And leave here, replied Dandelion. After all our work? Besides, I reckon we'd have a thin time. No, I'm sure none of us wants to do that. What we want is to get some does and bring them back here, said Hazel. Will that be difficult, do you think? I should have thought not, said Holly. Big warrens are often overcrowded, and some of the rabbits can't get enough to eat. The young does get edgy and nervous, and some of them don't have any kittens on that account. At least the kittens begin to grow inside them, and then they melt away again into their bodies. You know this? I didn't know, said Strawberry. That's because you've never been overcrowded. But our warren, the Threra's warren, was overcrowded a year or 2 back, and a lot of the younger does were reabsorbing their litters before they were born. The Threra told me that long ago Alarera made a bargain with Frith. Frith promised him that rabbits were not to be born dead or unwanted. If there's little chance of a decent life for them, it's a doe's privilege to take them back into her body unborn. Yes, I remember the bargain story, said Hazel. So you think there may be discontented does? That's hopeful. We're agreed, then, that we ought to send an expedition to this warren, and that there's a good chance of being successful without fighting. Do you want everyone to go? I'd say not, said Blackberry. 2 or 3 days' journey, and we're all in danger, both going and coming. It would be less dangerous for 3 or 4 rabbits than for Kehaar. 3 or 4 can travel quickly and aren't conspicuous, and the chief rabbit of this warren would be less likely to object to a few strangers coming with a civil request. I'm sure that's right, said Hazel. We'll send 4 rabbits, and they can explain how we come to be in this difficulty and ask to be allowed to persuade some does to come back with them. I don't see that any chief rabbit can object to that. I wonder which of us would be the best to send. Hazel Raw, you mustn't go, said Dandelion. You're needed here, and we don't want to risk you. Everyone's agreed on that. Hazel had known already that they would not let him lead the embassy. It was a disappointment, but nevertheless he felt that they were right. The other Warren would have little opinion of a chief rabbit who ran his own errands. Besides, he was not particularly impressive in appearance or as a speaker. This was a job for someone else. All right, he said. I knew you wouldn't let me go. I'm not the right fellow anyway. Holly is. He knows everything about moving in the open, and he'll be able to talk well when he gets there. No one contradicted this. Holly was the obvious choice, but to select his companions was less easy. Everyone was ready to go, but the business was so important that at last they considered each rabbit in turn, discussing who would arrive, who would be the most likely to survive the long journey, to arrive in good shape, and to go down well in a strange warren. Bigwig, rejected on the grounds that he might quarrel in strange company, was inclined to be sulky at first, but came round when he remembered that he could go on looking after Kehaar. Holly himself wanted to take Bluebell, but as Blackberry said, one funny joke at the expense of the chief rabbit might ruin everything. Finally they chose Silver, Buckthorn, and Strawberry. Strawberry said little, but was obviously very much pleased. He had suffered a good deal to show that he was no coward, and now he had the satisfaction of knowing that he was worth something to his new friends. They started early in the morning in the gray light. Kehaar had undertaken to fly out later in the day to make sure they were going in the right direction and bring back news of their progress. Hazel and Bigwig went with them to the southern end of the hangar and watched as they slipped away, heading to the west to the distant farm. Holly seemed confident, and the other three were in high spirits. Soon they were lost to sight in the grass, and Hazel and Bigwig turned back into the wood. Well, we've done the best we can, said Hazel. The rest's up to them and to El Herrera now. But surely it ought to be all right. Not a doubt of it, said Bigwig. Let's hope they're back soon. I'm looking forward to a nice doe and a litter of kittens in my burrow. Lots of little bigwigs, Hazel. Think of that and tremble. One of the things that I find interesting about Adam's choice of words is that Bigwig, as soon as he makes friends with Kehaar, starts referring to him as he and him. And Hazel continues to refer to Kehaar as it until Kehaar becomes more of a friend to the Warren. It's really interesting to me the way that Adams addresses otherness and different cultures and the way we look at outsiders through the lens of rabbits, which makes it easy for people not to take offense. Although it is still very sexist. Such is life.